says we are live, but we always have to wait an extra 3-4 seconds. Throw down our nice disclaimer.
Yay!
And everyone should be here now. You know, we are so popular. Before we do get into it, I mean, me, you will know, but I razzed someone's startup. His name is Dan.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if you saw the video or not, but the funniest thing, the biggest kick I got is when he pulls it up, like the YouTube channel or something I had pulled up, and it's the prior episode we did with me and you.
Okay.
And all of chat was like, holy shit, are they brothers? Like, are they twins? Like, because I had a larger beard too at that time.
No.
And all of chat was just like,
who are these two?
Are they the same people? Like, so, anyways, with that said, today's topic, developer to manager.
Yes.
So, Andre, tell me why you aren't a manager.
This is an interesting question. So for, I guess, everyone except for you and maybe one or two other people, the way we met was me having this, what the hell do? I need to find someone who went from IC to manager and explain to me what the hell is going on moment. That's a really good question. I was in a situation where I was doing some management style stuff on my team. I was doing team lead stuff, and I hit a point where I was looking for a new job, and the opportunity arose to become a manager or to go down the dev route. And it opened up a huge, first, it wasn't expected. It was something I think some people either go, it's time to become a manager, or some people don't. And I was in the middle boat going like, I don't know which way to go. But so I've stayed IC. I've found myself feeling like I can do more IC growth. I think there's still more that I want to learn. There's more I want to do on the technical side. I enjoy working with people, but I don't think I'm quite ready to do it just yet, if at all. So that's the situation I'm in. Whereas your situation is slightly different.
Very different. I left the IC track a long time ago. What is coding again? I don't even remember. That's a key difference. So why I went into management was, and we were talking about this pre-show, some companies just cap the bans on ICs or any of the dev paths, or it becomes extremely hard. Like, you know, especially at the smaller companies. And it's like, cool. So I don't see these ban caps on the manager path. Maybe that's something I should go into. So that's kind of in the back of my head how that started. Also just paired up with like my personality and, you know, my selfishness was, okay, I'm only going to produce so much work. But if I can support a team, and if I improve them by a percentage that's greater than the percent of contributions I could do, then this is going to like accelerate the team. It's going to accelerate everything I want to do. So it was all for selfish reasons, really. It was actually like, you know, you're on a team of like, well, anywhere between 5 to like 15 people are the teams that I've managed. And like on the extreme, on 15, like I only need to increase the team by what, 10 to 20%, not even. Actually less than that, because 10% is 150.
Yeah.
Like at 10% of each person, then you have me plus half of me, assuming it's like all even and whatnot. But also the other thing is, I'll say, and I think this drives a lot of people to management too, is you just deal with a lot of shitty managers. And that, and this was true for me too. I had a manager that was just very meticulous, we'll say, and other people might say a micromanager. And I could just see people leaving because of this individual in the company. And it wasn't even in theory. Like people just straight up be like, I'm leaving because this person's an asshole. And that drove me to be like, well, I think I can do better. And I think I didn't know what really a good manager looked like. I knew kind of the opposite, which is like, what bad management looks like. Therefore, I'm not going to do that. So that kind of got me into this.
That's such an interesting point you raised. The multiplication of your efforts seems to be the thing that happens, that comes up often when people are like, you can be a manager, you can multiply your efforts, you can be an enabler of other people. In my opinion, that is absolutely true. However, I do think that in certain senior tech positions, that's an expectation as well. You're not necessarily writing the code line by line. You're distributing the work in a sensible fashion from a technical perspective. The management track can deal with all the people problems and everything else that comes with that, and that's fantastic. But I do think that there's a overlap where there comes a point where you've got to realize that you have to do something to uncap yourself from that 8 hour a day needing to eat, sleep, and breathe, and all those other inconvenient things that slow your code down, and be able to perform. So I think that's a common factor between them. But the management part that scares me, that I don't think the technical leaders necessarily deal with, is the real nuts and bolts of motivating people. And I think there's something that people managers, that's a difficult thing. You can demotivate people as a tech leader very easily by telling everyone they're shitty at their job, or proposing technology that's a bad idea, or telling everyone that getting it out the door is more important than being high quality, or whatever, these things that rub engineers the wrong way. But I think the people management side, the making your team happy from a non-work perspective, or not just like the day-to-day work, that is a black box to me. So that is something I have no experience in, and that's terrifying, because it seems to sink a team. Like you're saying, people leave managers.
I don't remember the what the stats are, but everywhere I always read on like the Harvard Business Journals are always like, people don't leave companies, they leave managers.
Yeah.
And there's some truth, and there is also some lie to that. Like, if there are plenty of people who've left and their managers are great, but they're like, listen, the company's comp is just shit. And that has nothing to do with the manager to some extent, right? Like there are times where the manager's like, listen, no BS. I went to bat for you. I laid out a proposal. The company just says there's no money. They're not good. They would rather hire a new employee and ramp them up than to pay the additional whatever. Like you've just hit the ceiling at this company.
Yep.
And it's very hard to motivate people.
Well, that's the thing. That's how. What do you? Did you know that you could do that when you decided to become a manager?
I will say that one of the largest. Goddamn the camera! I always forget to sync it up to the phone. One of the hardest things I came to understand is that how I would have liked to be managed is not how everyone else likes to be managed.
Okay.
So I, as a developer, am like, you tell me where we are and you tell me where we want to go, and then like just get out of my way. Like, give me the deadline. I don't need any other guidance. I'll go talk to product myself, like whatever. I'll break down whatever wall we need. And that works great for me when I'm paired with a manager like that. There are plenty of people who I've managed that is not the way they want to be managed. Whether they know it is a whole other thing, but there are a lot of people where, I was like, oh, I'll manage people how I would like to be managed. Like, clearly that is the best way, right?
Absolutely.
No, totally. And the thing is, there's not like a one size fits all scenario, because like you could have John who wants to be very like hands-on manager who walks them through everything, and you'll have Lisa who's the same as me, and it's just like totally like, okay, Lisa, we need to build X feature because the customer is going to pay us more, and just figure it out. Just go. So how to motivate people, you have to understand where they're coming from. You also have to understand what the driver is, and the driver changes. Like, this is the thing.
Okay.
Lisa might now be like, listen, I want more money. That's the driving factor. Like, literally, as cold as it sounds, there are plenty of people, the money is the only driving factor, or that is a significant driving factor enough that it will outweigh the other factors. But that can evolve. Like, Lisa gets a bunch of promotions. Lisa's making whatever her number is now. Now what?
Mm-hmm.
Now it's not money, or money has diminished in what the driving factor is. And maybe it's look, I got what I want to be paid, but I'm burning myself out. Now it's work-life balance. And you constantly need to adjust with each of your team members to reevaluate, or ask them to reevaluate, and try and get them to figure out, is it the same priorities? Like the priorities that I have today in 2 years are going to be very different, right? In 2 years, anything could happen. Go back 2 years. COVID didn't happen.
Different situation entirely.
Right? Like, so before 2 years ago, before COVID, it might have just been like career progression and I just want to make as much. COVID happened. You're like, Corey, the motivation isn't money anymore. It's spending time at home so that my kid is there and safe and doesn't need to go to school.
Yeah.
Okay. Like, I'm not saying that necessarily motivates people. I'm saying you're trying to find what drives them. And from there, you try and find things that can align to get better output, to get what they want. Like, okay, cool. I'm going to put you on X project. It's a really hard deadline, but I can work with you so that you can pick up Tommy from school every day at 3:30 and no problem. Like that's what I need from you. This is what you're going to get in return. Is the flexibility. So yeah.
That is such an interesting thought, because I've never thought about the shifting aspect of it. But I think, so this is a shortfall, absolutely, that might be a big, shine a big light on the difference between IC and manager here. You're thinking about the people problems seemingly in more of a, people aren't code. They change, things evolve, motivations are there, it's emotional, it's more messy, it's not hard and fast, yes and no, black and white, this is how we do it. And maybe that's another attribute, like how comfortable are you with this more organic, more regularly changing space versus tech, which is moving quickly but kind of in a linear fashion.
I'd say it's kind of the same, actually. The weird thing is I find myself, I think I might have said this to you before. It's like if you want to become a great dev, you think like a manager. If you want to become a great manager, you think like a dev. It's like the inverse. But because I was going to say, as a manager, you would think like, oh, like you're dealing with all these things that are so different. And the code, I just write the code and it is what it is and it runs the same way. But the systems evolve just different aspects. Like when we write a code, that code works. And then when we get hammered by, instead of 100 requests, 100,000, all of a sudden you realize, oh, there was a bottleneck, that things have changed. Like, oh, there has to be a tweak here that used to not need a tweak. Like obviously it's different about people because we're not talking about requests. Yeah. But like you find out like the systems do evolve if the inputs change, just like people. Yeah. Like, prior to COVID, everything's constant, right? You go in, you do your job, everything. COVID happens. There has been a change to the system, just like in programming. You used to deal with 100 requests, now you're dealing with 10,000. Obviously, something's going to change, whether it's like a different tech stack, which could be from the people's aspect, it's like a different position, a different team. Like, it's a little weird to think about, but like the skills do, like you take that system thinking, you just apply it to people, and then on the dev side, it's like the opposite. Well, not the opposite, but like you think like a manager, which is, instead of thinking about the code, you should be thinking about
why,
the why, the how, the KPIs, the measurements, like all the stuff that you don't want to think about as a dev is actually the things that really help you progress.
That is so crazy. So something fascinating that I'm definitely interested in with this whole, like what you just said. When I was job hunting, it turned out that a lot of companies were saying that they've employed people managers from backgrounds in managing people, and they haven't had any experience in tech, and it's causing them to just not succeed. They can't do this. The positions, either the people who are on the tech team just aren't accepting of the person. They're like, who the hell are you? You've never written a line of code in your life before. I'm not going to trust you. Or how can I trust you to accurately go forward with an argument for or against a new piece of technology? So it seems like the communication between especially ICs and managers has to become better and better, and the communication between them, being able to speak to each other, is essential for both of us to succeed. If I'm not understanding you as my manager, and you're not understanding me as a senior dev on the team, we're screwed because it's not going to go anywhere.
So I guess there's two things to unravel here. My first opinion is that if you haven't written code for a substantial amount of time, it is far and few that should ever be a software development manager then. Yeah. Like I am talking 1 in maybe 10,000 SDMs or any management role. If you have not been a prior developer, you should not be a manager of devs. If that's what you want to do, then you should go in product management. Okay. You should go from the product side and not the development side, because it is very hard to sit there and understand like why someone is upset about someone else contributing code and not understand the code value. Like you might understand on a personal level why John doesn't like Lisa, because like, hey, Lisa just said he couldn't write code, and now John's sad. But you can't even understand, like, is there any argument actually valid here? Like maybe actually like Lisa's argument isn't even valid. Like maybe John code's actually really good. It's got test coverage and everything. But you don't know this. If you haven't written code, you don't understand what test-driven, or it's very hard to grasp what test-driven development is. It's very hard to understand like the stress that weighs on a dev who might bring something home, because it's like if you haven't done it, it's really hard to grasp. So I don't think that you should be a manager of any sort of development team if you haven't been a dev yourself. And like, yeah, there's always an exception. Like, but I'm telling you, the exception is so extreme. Like I have honestly no one comes to mind right now that I can even list that doesn't write code. And I would say that they are in the top 1% of it being an STM. Like no one comes to mind right off the top of my head. So it is rare.
It just doesn't work. Yeah, the point you made is absolutely for sure. If I go to my manager and I'm pissed about the fact that a peer introduced 3 different tickets worth of changes into the same PR, they might view that as an optimization. From a practicing engineering perspective, that's gonna irritate the life out of me. So yeah.
Well, what I was gonna say, and just to push the analogy further, it's like, imagine you have a tech lead. Like this will relate for devs to understand. It's like you're a tech lead and you're going to the company. You're like, look, I should run I should be the manager of all the sales work.
Yeah.
And they're going to say, you've never sold anything. How are you going to talk to customers? You never talk to a customer. How are you going to manage these teams? You don't understand even how much stress they go through because they're all commission based and it's a different comp structure. And people just look at you like you're crazy. But if you sit there and then you're like, well, I've managed people before, I should be able to manage developers. It's like, no, like that's how much difference there is. Yeah. Like I've never seen anyone at any org be like, yeah, I used to be a tech lead, and now I am like the regional sales manager of North America. I've never seen this. Like, so yeah. So I think once you have if you have an SDM who was a dev before, and then it comes down to, okay, how long ago is that? How much time does that SDM have, that software development manager or director, whoever it may be, to allocate to still development? And as you go up further, it's going to be less and less.
Nice. Yeah.
And the further you go up, the more you have to rely on your ICs. So I know there are conversations where I am out of touch in modern practice, and I just need to keep my mouth shut. Like I could be a sounding board. Someone can come ask me opinion. Like, hey, do you think X is good versus Y? Cool. Here's my 2 cents given what I knew. But if that person is saying like, we should do X, I'm not going to sit there and say, my gut feels Y. I might say my gut feels Y, but I ain't going to tell you to do that. You're living, breathing, and sleeping this. And then it's just knowing, like, and being honest where your expertise is. Like, listen, if some junior dev comes in, and maybe I haven't touched XYZ in a long time, but they're saying something where I'm like, I'm 95% sure, like, this is going to take down prod. Like I'm pretty sure like this is just gonna blow up.
Yeah.
Like, okay, either I'm going to say like, here's where I think it's wrong and here's why, and I'm not going to let the code, or I'm going to go find another IC in the company and be like, am I fucking crazy? Like, you deal with this.
Yeah.
Am I correct? Yeah. Okay. Let's have a meeting. You discuss it instead of me, because, but it's just knowing where your expertise is and where you're strong, just like as a dev. Like if your background is all Java and someone comes in and says like, hey, I wrote this thing in Python, and like you've never touched Python, it's kind of hard to go in and be like, hey, this is the wrong way to write it.
Yeah.
It's like,
what?
Like,
so immediately when you were saying this, I've had the experiences where managers have said to me, no, I have done this before. And they're referring to pretty below average company performance 15 years prior with shitty technology. And they're of the opinion that everything else was the reason for failure in that particular product or space. But the thing that they implemented is correct. And the case I had, I don't want to go into all the details, but essentially I told this person, this is the way we should do it. They said to me, when I did this problem a long time ago, we hit issues. I said, I understand that. Since that time, everyone has adopted this as the correct way of doing it, and it's been fixed. This is the way to do it. And then they insisted on saying, no, you are incorrect. They have done this. And at the time that they were doing it, they were more senior of an engineer, which is, I use the air quotes because senior engineer in company A and junior engineer in company B could very well be the same technical performance, but that's besides the point. But this manager took the stance of, you are wrong, I am right. And the annoyance there was, it made me feel like the manager is immediately on the tech kind of linear progression. They're above me. And any call I make technically can be overruled by a manager. So the thing you just said was different. You seek out advice. You seek,
the other thing is like, okay, so there's some truth to this. There's always some truth to it. Yeah. It's like, it's not that the manager is on like a higher technical ranking. It is, at the end of the day, it's like, who's going to be blamed for this failure of the product not being delivered? And then it's typically not the development team. Okay, like if you miss your deadline, like that's probably everyone. But like you deploy something and like they deem the product not a success.
Yeah.
Like that is rarely on an IC. So that's typically going to end up on more your either your tech lead or your SDM or director. So at the end of the day, it's like, would I say that they have some sort of like veto? Yeah, but we're in a hierarchy always. Like I can go in and say like the correct way of deploying in Kubernetes is X. And if our CEO comes in and be like, listen, you're wrong, and he has no development background,
then
like I can outline why and how it's not and whatever, and get alliances of whatever, all the other devs to say the same. But at the end of the day, ultimately, if that exec comes in and says like, that's the way we're moving forward, it's not my company.
True. Yeah, I mean, like, if it's a company changing decision, yeah.
And that's not like, oh, I don't care. That's just is like the reality. I'm not the owner of that company. At some level, there is always, and you could say, oh, what happens if you own equity in the company? Yeah, you're looking to move the company forward, but like, there's always a hierarchy.
So it's, yeah, okay, that is a good way of looking at it.
Do I think managers should do that? No.
Well, that's where the line becomes blurred for me, because managers are, by definition, managing the team and ensuring that there's these high-level goals which are being moved towards. Arguably, those goals in some places are then shared with the technical leadership, and the team, however they're working it, decides how they're going to go about implementing this manager's goal from like how do we actually do it. The job of the tech lead, for instance, is to make sure that poor technical decisions are avoided, or the best that can be done in that time. So it becomes a weird place, because in that situation, it was a startup environment and the decision was made. I will stick to my guns in saying that was a terrible, terrible decision made by that manager because of it being so technically inferior. And it's not it's obviously you can't be 100% objective and say like, I feel like I should have won that argument. For me, if it was someone else asking for the opinion, I would probably assume that I would have the same opinion. And all the current documentation, everything just reiterates that. So I don't know if I went for a beer with the guy now and went, hey, that was stupid. If you would be like, you was totally right, or if they would still stick with that opinion. But above both of us is a CTO or a management chain. And if they come down going, your job is to provide the best technical input, what the hell went wrong? Why couldn't you express this to your manager? Why did this even happen? So there is this weird, like, where, and this is starting to go into I think the next topic that you mentioned before, which is the individual tracks. When do managers and technical contributors become peers? Where does this track blur, and where are you reporting to your manager, and where are you guiding your manager technically? So that's where things get interesting.
And there's two different paths, as you kind of had brought up. It's like there's I report into whoever, director of engineering or VP of engineering. But there are times, and it depends on the org and what the org believes and how it should be structured. But, I do believe that there are conversations where it's like, okay, my technical seniority trumps out, my boss's seniority. Like, it would have to be his boss's boss. And because at that level, it is someone who makes a call for a whole department. And I know that if this fails, that person's on the chopping block.
Yeah.
So ultimately, that person is going to have to make some sort of call, because at the end of the day, they are there to provide results on X. And like I said, there's always a hierarchy. Someone's always going to have a veto, regardless of if you're technically correct or not. And then a good manager is going to try and explain this anyways, of like why they think this way and why they're making these sacrifices. Like, if they're just doing it because they think they're correct, like, okay, good luck. And then everyone leaves.
Exactly what happened.
Yeah, because, you're not always going to have consensus, but you need a team that is on the same page, that when there is something that is agreed upon, whether they agree with that decision or not, they will follow through with that decision.
Yeah.
Because if you do not have a scenario like that, what's going to happen is everyone's going to half-ass it and then go, look, I said it, we should have done it this way.
Yeah. I totally agree with you. That I told you so situation is terrifying. To have that one person who's like, I'm going to make sure this doesn't work. You don't want to give them work to do. You don't want to work with them. So yeah, that is a difficult situation to handle. Just for context, I didn't leave based on that decision. It happened again, a second time around, with even I'm going to claim a low-hanging fruit in the form of like, no one does it the way you're proposing this way. This is why we need to change it. This is how we need to change it. And I was met with, no, that seems like it's over architecture. I'm like, cool, I'm out. Thank you. I'm done. So yeah.
And like, the management side, you have to explain, because I always tell my teams, it's like, I will give you the constraints of what you have to work within. So here's the timeline, and here's what we need to achieve. I will say what I think I think the correct path is. But if you can propose something that is going to meet the timeline and achieve the same thing, then ultimately you are the person who's writing that code and is going to be stuck maintaining it for whatever time you're at the company. Then so be it.
Yeah.
Like, because then who am I to be on my ivory tower being like, oh, I think it should be this way? Like, if I disagree that much, I will find the time to make the other fucking pull request. That's like, here's the other contribution. But I never had the time for that. So at the end of the day, I realized that there are some battles that are to be lost, and there are some battles that must be won. And a lot of times those battles I can just sacrifice. They're honestly not going to impact the business that much. The team will survive no matter how bad the code is, or whatever hack was done. Even if I disagree with it or whatever, it can always come back from it. Like we could. It's not like a building, right? Like once we built it, it's like fuck. Like it's a 200-story building. The only way we're fixing that is basically tear down the building. It's like it's code. We build another building alongside of it, and it's all virtual, so you don't have to worry about permits and all this. I mean, you have to go ask for time to build it, but So I will say that there are things I think managers pigeonhole themselves on this without explaining it to their teams, and it's hard to be a manager. I will say that this is one of the questions I did, and or is it harder to be a manager? Is what I wrote, but I think in these conversations you have to get your team to understand that okay, it is a different role, but there are a lot of things that are vastly different. And good managers you won't know because they will have shielded this from their team. Like you could have a manager who I've had people come and propose things, and they believe whether it's correct or not is a whole other thing, that this is the right way of doing it. This is the way it should be architected. Cool. That's 100 days. We have 20 days, or literally the department's gone.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can't tell people, like literally the department's gone. You're like, look, that's not gonna fly. I'm just telling you, we have to do it the other way. And they're like, what the fuck is this? Like, like I'm out, that's the wrong way. All we do is hacks. And it's like, yeah, but you don't always see the other stuff, which is like, not every team always has the luxury to do it the right way.
Yeah.
Whether it is the right way or not, like that's up to who's saying it is the right way sometimes.
Yeah.
But
and trendy, because there'll always be the one person on the team that's, let's rewrite it in Go. 2 weeks later, let's rewrite it in Rust. We'll be good to go. It'll fix everything.
We have to rewrite in the new language I have on my GitHub because that's the next gen language.
Yeah, need those stars. Anything to get them.
And I was going to say on this is like, there's a lot of times you don't have the full story. And what I'm saying, but also there's a lot of times managers don't have all the time to try and get the team to fully understand everything. Like there's a lot of moving parts that are hidden from teams. Like I guess this question should be something more like, what is the difference? Like if managers aren't writing code, what the fuck are they doing? Like, like that's why devs want to become managers, right? Like, hey, look, that looks a lot easier than writing all this code.
You just chill.
Yeah. So I mean, the just chill is an understatement. It's a different skill set. It's a whole different. I think when me and you had talked about that, I said it's not a promotion. It's a different track, and some skills have overlap, but there are other skills that are entirely different. Like the people side, as much as I say, like think like a dev, some of that does translate, but there are some things like there's no skill on development that prepares you for like firing people.
Yeah.
Zero. And I mean zero. Like
that's an entirely different thing altogether. And I mean, you can go so far as to say that as a dev could look at someone's metrics every 6 months and be like, sorry, you're bottom of the list. Bye. Like if you were a piece of code, that's what I would do. But
it's one thing to say that. Like a dev was like, well, yeah, we should just get rid of like bottom performers. It's a whole other thing when you have to sit there and like, I've had to let people go, and this shit is like weeks before you even have that conversation with them. That you're like every night you're like, holy fuck, like I've gotten spots where I thought like, like I had let someone go, and it didn't go very well. It was extremely like bad termination. Basically, they hadn't seen it coming, and obviously they were upset, and obviously they thought it was unjust. And I remember after that being like, do I need to worry if this person's going to show up at my house or not?
Wow.
like, not because I thought that was gonna happen, but like there's a whole other thing. Like, you never think of this as death. Have you ever wrote code and you went home and you're like, man, I wonder if that code's gonna show up at my house and like bust down the door? Like,
No, it's like you're saying, I could imagine a very real situation happening where you happen to be close enough that you're like, am I going to run into that person while shopping? Am I going to run into them in a day, in a month? Am I going to like run into them outside because they can't even afford to go buy anything? Like all these crazy things that I don't have to worry about. I'm completely sheltered from that.
yeah, like there are definitely times, like, yeah, it wanes on you. Like, you're like, there are definitely people, I'm sure, who look at managers and like, oh, that's so easy. But there's a lot of things behind the scenes that just eat up a ton of time. Like, well, I can continue the conversation on like letting someone go. It's like, you have to loop in HR. They're going to have back and forth meetings with you. They're going to try and find out if it's your team, if it's that individual, if it's you. And even before you had that conversation, you're asking yourself internally, like,
Yeah,
is this me? Am I sandbagging this person? Am I not like managing with proper expectations? How can I manage better? Like, and then the time of going back and forth with HR, then one-on-ones with the person, try and do improvement. Then if you go down the PIP path, like, it depends on the company, but sometimes it's every day you're basically emailing like what happened that day as a document, and then meeting once a week with that individual to say if they're improving or not. Like, everyone thinks like, oh, why aren't you writing code? It's like, fuck, there's a lot of other things.
yeah. I mean, you say the pup thing. So a weird situation for me is the managers. That's a real time consuming thing that needs to be done when a person is not performing. My only experience of pups happening is when someone gets put on a performance improvement plan. It's a courtesy to say it's time to start looking elsewhere. That's the interpretation that's had. And it sucks because I realized from that perspective, when I was thinking about, do I go into management or not? Do I want to be in a place where I say to someone, in all honesty, you're going on a PIP. I need you to either really look elsewhere and I will try and shield you as best I can, or you need to actually work with me as best as we can to get you out of this. And I don't think I have any idea of how I would handle that, because you're working with a person who's between wanting to rage quit in the most literal sense and just tell you to get lost and leave. And then the other aspect is them saying, this whole PIP thing is just bullshit so you can get around legislation. Like, does it even matter? And now you're trying to console this person, keep them balanced, keep them sane to some degree. Like, yeah.
Well, and it's hard because that once you start that process, it might be all downhill.
Yes.
So you're torn. You're like, so okay. So developer to manager. If you're thinking of this, let me tell you, it is not an easy ride. It is at times some of the worst shit ever. There are definitely times personally that I thought it was way worse than development. Like, development, you carry the weight of the deadline and the code and not wanting to let your team down. On the manager side, you carry the weight that you might end someone's like career.
Mm-hmm.
Like you might put someone on the street.
Yeah.
Like for real, not even theory. Like, I mean, for real. Like I've had other managers tell me when they've let people go that, once they let them go, they're like, oh, that sucks. Whoever.
Mm.
John was having a kid in 2 weeks, and you're like, I fucking didn't even know.
But now that is such a hard thing, and that aspect and the dealing with the connectivity between the members on the team. From a code perspective, I know that person, when I send them a PR, they're going to completely lose their mind until I have 100% code coverage. That other person, I know they've just spent the whole weekend learning Rust. If I come in there with anything that isn't that style, they're going to completely lose their mind. But now, as a manager, you've got the situation where John's on the team, comes to work on Monday, really upset about a sports team losing. Someone else comes in and goes, "Oh, I think the ref made a great call." And now you've got complete bullshit politics between them because of something that happened completely externally. And it's your responsibility to keep the team sane and not pick sides or do whatever. So there's this whole other category that isn't even an extension of IC problems. It's a different set of
Oh
IC
yeah.
problems.
The worst is probably when you have two people in your team not getting along or misinterpret something between each other.
Mm-hmm.
Like, whoever, pick whatever names. It's like Alice and John will say.
Mm-hmm.
Alice submits pull request. John says, Alice is always a piece of shit to me in the comments of the pull request. Every time I try and give good feedback, I feel like Alice doesn't want to hear anything.
Mm-hmm.
And then what you don't realize is, like, as a manager on the team, it might be like, pick whatever. Like, Alice's mom has cancer, is in the hospital,
Yeah.
might be dying.
Yeah.
And I can't go to John and be like, listen, shit's real. Like,
Yes.
the best I can do is, like, Alice is having a really rough time personally, and I think you're digging too deep into the pull request. And maybe you should look at the other way. Like, how did she interpret that pull request, or vice versa? Or try and get them in a room together, be like, go back to Alice and be like, you know, John feels like the way that you respond, you don't want his help. And she might say, like, that's not what I mean at all. I'm like, well, that's how John is feeling it. So how do we make it so that it doesn't? Because you never want to pin someone against, like, John thinks you're a piece of shit, or John says that you're treating him. You always talk about how it makes people feel. John feels that you don't want to be hearing, like, you don't want to take his feedback. John feels that you're not listening to him. That makes John feel like you don't respect him. Do you not respect him? Right? Like, it's a whole different thing. So going from developer to manager, like, this is the stuff that doesn't translate at all. Yeah. Like, if you're not maybe not a social person, but, like, if you have a hard time listening and sitting there and just trying to look at it from different perspectives, you are going to have a hard time as a manager, because you're going to be stuck in spots where you have to look at it on both sides. You have to maintain relative neutralness and just try and get everyone on the same page, and making everyone understand, like, look, we're a team. We're in the same company. Are we not all here to achieve the same thing? Yeah. Might be different individual goals, but is it not to move the company forward to get, John wants more time at home, and Alice wants more money. Like, but the goal is, or the byproduct is, the company makes more money, you get both of that, right? Like, both of you will be happy. Yeah, that's my rambling.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. And I think it's difficult to find an equivalent when you do go into management, that you have this whole subset of problems of, how do I deal with the intercommunication between people? On the tech side, the only thing I can think of is that you have the situation where you're tasked with bigger and bigger problems. That's essentially it. They're similar to some extent, but your changing has to think fundamentally differently. So, like, how do I multiply my efforts and all those things? But you don't have to deal with that problem. And I think perhaps the individual in the IC is the defining factor. Like, as a manager, you're never really working on your own, by the sounds of it, from what you're saying. And as an IC, you almost are, no matter how far up the food chain you are. You're collaborating, you're providing feedback, you're providing guidance, or whatever the case may be, that's similar to a manager, but you're not the bit between the people. The manager seems to be everything that is between the people, whether it be between the teams, between the different teams, between the people within the team. That's the managerial part. But the IC bit is always just, you stay within your lane to some degree. You've got bigger and smaller communication channels that change as you go up or down or whatever. But yeah, that seems to be it. So saying it's harder, I guess, depends on personality traits. If you're an introvert who can't talk to people, I struggle with confrontation. And that part of me made me very hesitant about the managerial path. And that seems to be something that you need to be fine with. You need to be able to go home and sleep knowing that you let go of the wrong person, which is one problem, but you have to be able to stand and actually look someone in the eye and say, you're being a total ass. Like, we can't have this, and fix it and not feel bad and apologize and remove all the message from that because you're feeling bad.
The worst is probably being fine with the confrontation and you thinking you have a clear message. And say one-on-ones, you think that you're making it very clear that someone's underperforming, and the reality is they have not clicked into that. That is probably the worst things, because you can be the most controversial, like you can be just dandy with confrontation, but when you catch someone off guard, it's no longer just like factual stuff anymore or anything like that. They just think you're a living piece of shit.
Yeah.
And I don't think you're ever necessarily fine with it. You just find ways to improve. Like I know as a manager, there have been plenty of times I fucked up. Like there are times where I should have did better. I should have had earlier one-on-ones on whatever. I should have brought up things earlier. Like we should have had a pip sooner. Like, oh, the issue that started off as not a big deal between Bob and Alice that I didn't address early on, and we all thought was funny, and then it became a serious shit. Like, okay. And all you can do is like, I guess the equivalent is like, as a dev, every time you've had issues where you took down prod, you're like, fuck, but you learned.
Yeah.
You got to iterate. You got to be fine with, and that didn't mean you stop writing code, right? You weren't like the first time you took down like prod or had a prod outage or prod impact. You weren't like, all right, pack up my keyboard. I guess I can't deal with this shit. Like, you might have went home and felt like shit. You might have cried if it was bad enough. You might have lost your job even. Like, who knows what the impact was? But you have to be like, okay, how do I make sure that doesn't happen? What are the systems? What is the process? What did I learn? Like, how could I prevent it? Right. So
yeah. So that's an interesting point, because we mentioned now the difficulty, and I just thought of one area that is somewhat different between management and IC in the other direction. I know people who've actively pursued management, and the reason they did that was they kind of got in a situation where one day it was clear that they'd fallen behind on some of the tech, and they sort of threw up their hands and went, fuck it, I'm out. I cannot spend another 2 or 3 years learning the next framework just to have it replaced in 3 years again. And I'm tired of reading Hacker News. I'm tired of learning about how functional programming is bad, functional programming is good, functional programming is bad. Like, what do you... And they took the stance of, if I can learn people skills, at least I can execute and not have to worry about it becoming completely useless or out of date after 2 years.
It's valid, but there is a great resource. So if you want to go from developer manager, there's a book called Leading Snowflakes.
Yeah.
It is a great book. And the reason why I bring it up is it's exactly what I was going to say is, okay, you have people skills, but the problem is everyone's a snowflake.
Yes.
Everyone's unique.
I don't think...
And I don't mean that in a mean way of like, oh, you're a snowflake, like, oh, you think you're so unique. I mean, just everyone is different.
They want to be handled differently.
Yeah, like the people skills you learned aren't always applicable always, or they don't work how you think they would work. Like,
I learned that. That's the only lesson I learned from being a team lead in my experience, my 1 year or whatever. That moment when you go, I don't understand. I spoke to 4 people. 3 of them were like, thank you for providing the information in that way. You clearly put the effort in. 1 of them walks away disgruntled. And you're like, what the hell is going on? And you find out for them, what you did is almost insulting. How can you, like, what? You can't treat me the same way as them. No, they're not going to say that. No one really actively realizes it. But it's this realization that, yeah, exactly like you said, they want to be treated differently. I had to sit down with my manager, the most awkward one-on-one ever. Said to him, I need you to be honest with me. I've been through a bunch of managers who have not been transparent with me. Be transparent, and I will probably get upset for 10 minutes, but I'll be fine. But I need you to be transparent, because that breakdown of communication is what's going to leave me anxious and sleepless and all these things. If you tell me you did a shit job what were you thinking? Go home. I'll be happier than you saying, that last PR, I noticed you had 5 PR comments. Normally you only have 1. Was your breakfast okay? Like, that doesn't fly with me. And some other people, it seems that's how they want to be dealt with. So yeah, you make a great point. There's definitely constantly new people. And I'm sure that when the team scales, you've got the same problem as, like you said, requests, equating the two. You get from 1,000 to 10,000 requests. You've got a team of 4 people. You get to a team of 10 people. Now you've got totally different people. You've got a different culture almost.
And it changes. Just like on the IC track, the responsibilities and what you do as like a junior dev to intermediate changes, and from like et cetera, right? They all change. You know, at the highest level, you might be less and less involved in writing the code and more about the system design and architecturing and keeping the engineering org following some sort of standard, like standardization convention, and moving them towards something. The same thing on the management is like managing a tech lead or a team lead even of like 6. It's different when you're at 15. It's different when you're at 30 because things change. At 30, you don't have 30 direct reports. You have 30 indirect. So it rolls up. Yeah. So you might have only still 6 reports or 4, and those will be your managers of managers maybe at that point. But it changes. Yeah. You're no longer about, coaching how people to build up their technical and whatnot. You're trying to get it. So how do I get this manager to build out their managers and get them to think about different things so that they're able to instill their managers, so their managers are able to have those real conversations. Like both tracks are similar, like I said, in the same sense, but then there are some skill sets that are just like
completely different.
Yeah. Like the people stuff, like the direct people stuff, there is nothing on the engineering side that actually prepares you for that. Like, you know, dealing with, as you're saying, it's hard. You'll have a one-on-one with someone, they'll be like, I need you to be honest. But you can't just be honest without trust.
Yep.
Because you need the other person to, like, if I just got someone on my team and they're like, be honest, and I just go and be like, listen, all the code you wrote was totally garbage.
Yeah.
And this has got to change, and this has got to change. And they're not going to take, for most part, they're probably not going to take it from a good spot of being like, look, they want me to be promoted. They know where my weaknesses are. They're just trying to get me approved and to adjust. And they're trying to offer out support to get me there. Right. You might just go, fuck this, I'm out of this company.
Yeah.
Like,
well, that's I can totally see that. And I think there's probably more of a role independent comment, like trust is required. And both ways. So this is my one rant. People who are ICs think that it is the manager's responsibility to create the relationship to make them successful. Bullshit. You are responsible just as much as your manager is for many aspects. And as far as career growth, your manager is not responsible for that. They are a mechanism and an enabler for what you want to get somewhere. I've worked with people who've been amazing at this, where they've managed up and they've expressed this is where they want to go and this is how the growth needs to go, and it's worked very well. I've worked with other people where they're like, my manager doesn't say I'm ready yet. I'm like, okay, have you set goals? No. How the fuck do they know what you want? Like, so you can't.
This resonates so much.
Yeah, you can't just have this. A manager's role is not to push this cart of engineers from one level to the next and be like, cool, you've been here for 5 years. Here's the next stop. Like, get off here for IC5, next stop IC6. Doesn't work that way. So that thing drives me crazy. And the reason I feel passionately about it is it took me a long time to realize that. I was under the impression that it was like school. You got your grades, you got promoted, you go to the next level. Awesome. Doesn't work like that. You've got to find the work. You have to be able to execute the stuff. If you're getting shitty work, often, and I only realized this very recently, if you go to your manager and you say, actually, you know what, I'm really interested in this aspect, they're going to be like, whoa, on the timeline, here's the roadmap. Like, what I need right now is not what you want, but if you get that done relatively quickly, we can put you onto this awesome project that is exactly in line with what you want. And there is the interplay between the manager and the IC working well, where managers outlining everything that's there, done all the crazy legwork, figured out what direction we're actually taking, how we're planning on executing, and then you come in and actually try and get it done. So yeah, that part, it immediately hypes me up about but my manager's not promoting me. Fuck off. Like it's a different situation.
I think this is something that I see more and more.
Mm-hmm.
That devs look towards the managers for a lot of career progression, and it's great that your manager can provide guidance on what to do and what are the steps to probably move forward. I think that it flattens out quite quickly. Like, you're going to hit a spot where your manager is basically probably going to be like, look, you just need to do more, you need to find more, etc.
Yeah.
And that burden really is, like, I as a manager, let me tell you, I would greatly prefer someone like on my team showing up and saying, I want to be at X.
Yeah.
Here are the things that I know I can do today. Here is what I think I should be doing. And here's what I don't want to do. Like, is this going to impact me? How do I do the other things? Can we allocate time? Do you think that I'd better like spend effort elsewhere?
Mm-hmm.
That is much better than I want to be X.
Cool.
Fuck, like there's different paths. Like some people it's just like work the extra hours.
Yeah.
Like that will get you pretty far. And then, but it's also like context and scenario. Like, I don't want to work extra hours. Okay, then you need to find projects that are like fucking extremely high impacting and do them within your normal hours. Like, that's the other way then. Like, you either do a lot of something, or you do few but of high impact.
There we go. Right? Grab that legacy code and fix it.
Yeah.
In the tradition with previous talks.
Yeah. Our go-to thing is it's all about the legacy code.
Exactly.
Actually, to be honest, like not about legacy, but I was going to say touching the code that nobody wants to touch or nobody wants to change. It might not even be necessarily like old code, but it might be like hairy, like just code that's just hacked together recently. It powers a lot of the site, but no team wants to touch it because nobody knows how it really works. Then come with a plan and ask how that can be put in motion and what needs to be changed to get what you want.
So, sorry, I interjected. No. The thing here is, I know we tend to, the thing we seem to be most interested in as devs in general and dev managers and everything is career growth. And that's awesome. How the hell do we do it? It's a very difficult thing, and a lot of people don't, including myself. The reason I enjoy these conversations so much is that it's actually an insight into something like, you as a manager, how the hell do I progress? What are you looking for in your ICs? And that's important. But I really do think that a bigger underlying factor with this whole thing is if you approach your manager with like what you're saying, this is what I'm good at, this is what I want to do, this is what I don't want to do, wait, I want to be this person. Or, you know what, I'm thinking of having a kid in 9 months. Can we tee up the situation such that I'm not the on-call SME for this crazy thing that's always on fire? Let's do that. It just makes you happier. And that's probably something that you should optimize for, at least partially. Even if you are just out of school, I know that a lot of junior ICs are like, now's my chance for no responsibility. That's cool, but you're going to hate the industry. 10 years of that, and it's going to make you grumpy and cynical and all those things. Too close to home, but it's those things. So optimizing for happiness by being transparent with your manager, being honest about it, and all these things that we mentioned that are so hard about being a dev manager are all in line with that. They can help you work out the problematic interactions you're having with your team members. They can work to help you grow. They can help you progress personal skills that could be related to work. So
look at this. Just plays right into this.
How does someone make the switch? That is a great question.
I can give my 2 cents on this because it pairs just well with what we were saying of like you come with a plan, right? You need to approach your existing manager. I think management might be my thing. Here's what I'm thinking. Here's what I think I should be doing. How do I move forward? Your manager's probably going to tell you, one, you're crazy. And that, why are you doing this? You should probably stay the IC track. I think good managers start with this. Honestly, I don't think any manager, very rarely is a manager like, oh, yeah, you'd be a great manager.
Yeah.
It's usually like, do you know what you're getting yourself into? Let's start there. And then the way that I think a lot of, unless you're extremely senior where you can influence large organizational change already, I'd say you're looking to start ironing out leadership. And that just might be in your team itself. So the progression that normally naturally happens is you're going to go into a tech lead. So you are going to have a team that reports into you, but you're mostly only going to deal with the technical stuff.
Yeah.
And from there, you're going to take on more of the one-on-ones and the progression. And how do you make the switch? I don't know.
So
books were helpful.
That description you just gave, that's the point at which I jumped ship from the company I was at and went, I'm going to IC senior route, different direction. But I was almost told that there's this gap where we need a tech lead, kind of team lead, not necessarily tech lead, but someone to help the team to take the big tasks, give them to them. And it was sort of looked at from me being more passive, where I didn't express any interest, but I didn't say, I don't want to be a manager. And my manager interpreted that as, hey, you can talk to people. They seem to listen to you. Let's see how you do this. And then next thing it was weird because I was like, I'm not having one-on-ones and I'm not doing any performance review stuff. I'm not a manager. And I swear the moment I thought that, I got a message 5 seconds later from one of the people on my team and they were like, hey, can we have a sit down? And I sat down with them. And then I realized when they refer to it as a one-on-one, I'm like, holy shit, I've been having one-on-ones with these team members of mine for 6 months now. And yes, I am. And then I got contacted about the performance from my manager of these people. And it was this weird bait and switch situation. So I felt like I had been sort of
Andre, the manager who didn't know he was a manager.
There we go, navigated towards it, which was kind of strange. I was still trying to do dev work, which wasn't happening as well because I was doing so many things. So in that case, I think had I just passively sat back, I would have become a manager without even realizing it. I would have suddenly had a change of title and been like, oh, cool. Where's the manager's lounge? That's the kind of reaction.
It's on the 6th floor, by the way.
Nice.
Past the hall, around the corner.
There we go. So that's the thing. But colleagues of mine who've actively switched had to sit. They went through the same experience you mentioned. Went to the manager and they said, I want to be a manager. And they went, are you sure? Have you tried everything else? Is this for you?
You want to try and make your manager's life easier. And we said this before as a dev. If you want to get promoted, just find a way to make your manager's life easier.
Yeah.
If you want to go into management, you're going to try and make your manager's life easier by the other things that aren't picked up by devs, which is hey, I'm interested in this. Can I shadow you on some meetings with product?
Oh, that's useful. That's great advice.
The worst case is your manager goes, you're probably not going to learn anything. The best case is you go there, you realize management's not for you, but you get insights from product.
There we go.
Oh, wow, I actually understand why I'm writing this feature now. Great.
Yeah.
And then what you want to do is, like we said, build up the trust. And there's going to be someday, you do this long enough, someday your manager's will be like, all right, John, can you just go to the meeting, make notes, don't make any decision.
Yeah.
You have no decision power. Just go, listen, come back. We'll discuss what the fuck they talked about, and then we'll talk about whatever. Yeah. But that's the start, right? Because then, okay, that means that I don't probably need to go to these weekly syncs with product. Because you're going to go in, you're going to get whatever feedback for that team, you're going to come back, great. That's one less meeting I need to go to. Mm-hmm. And then, and if you go to these meetings, you're like, I hate my life.
Then
abort.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
You're going to write less code and more meetings.
Yeah, no, that's That is for sure what happens. Your calendar inverts. It goes from all the space you have to all the space you don't have. So that's it. I think the one thing that I wanted to reiterate was, so the switch. Do you have to do it? Do you have to become a manager if you want to grow?
No. It's what we said beforehand in the pre-show. If your company caps your bands on the IC track, and they don't have a clear progression on the IC track, then you either switch because you're happy at that company and you're coasting or whatever, or you pack up and leave the company. If you do like management and you do want to switch, okay, so be it. But in most cases in the present day and how hot the market is, there is no reason you need to go into management unless you want to. That's my 2 cents.
People I know, and these are people who've become managers, take the stance that it's a promotion. I think in some cases, yes. In other cases, no. It's a lateral move to a totally different job. That's what I want to believe just from the things I've heard and the understanding I've had. I was offered a management position with absolutely zero experience, which terrified me because it made me think, are there people who are becoming managers with absolutely no management experience? Which has to be true at some point, but
yeah,
it was just a weird realization.
Yeah. Anyways, I think we'll just leave it there.
Yes, so much.
And that was it. So until next week, I guess, and we'll just ciao.
Bye.
See ya.